So you've
well,
only been.
I should have been appointed, and possibly I have, and I haven't seen the email or something like that, but because I
Kimberly,
should have received something about Peter Clark, shouldn't I? And I haven't. I didn't know that Peter wasn't going to be here today.
Neither did Peter until a day or so ago. A day, you know, he's only just found out that he couldn't join us.
yeah.
Okay, and so am I subbing or am I not subbing today?
No.
Okay, Chairman,
No,
we are live now on YouTube.
Thank
We can
you.
start the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's meeting of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee. The first that we've done on this system. So I hope it will all go fairly well. And we will start with the minutes. There are minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of January 2020, which actually have already been approved by council back in February. So I think they're just here for us to receive and note. So are those minutes noted?
Yep.
Thank you. Apologies for absence, please, Kimberly.
we have apologies from absence from Councillor Clark. And as we have discussed earlier, Councillor Bishan hasn't joined us yet. So they may be.
You've muted yourself.
I don't know how I've managed to do that.
Yeah, that's okay. So anyway, we may be joined. Fine. Thank you very much. And can I welcome Councillor Gale to her first meeting of the committee? Thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you, Chairman.
Pleasure. Kimberly, any declarations of interest, please?
No declarations submitted prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the public?
Again, none submitted prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Thank you. And any questions from members?
No, Chairman.
Thank you. Item number 6 is action authorised by the chairman and vice chairman in association with the executive director. Well, there hasn't been any, so there is nothing there to note. Now, the main business of the day, we move to items 7 and 8. Item 7 on your agenda is the Hackney Carriage private hire policy, fare review and licensing fees, and I'll ask Mr. Hughes to introduce the item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I just mention to Kimberly first that I think Richard's waiting to get into the meeting, Richard Homewood. Regarding the taxi fees, we were due to go on the 23rd of March 2020. Items for consideration to the Licensing and Regs Committee were licensing fees, the Hackney Carriage and private hire policy review following consultation, and the fare update for Hackney Carriage fares. This meeting was cancelled due to COVID-19 and was postponed. Following COVID-19 and the pressures it's put on our taxi trade, it was felt that we should consider not increasing the fees this year, putting the Hackney Carriage and policy review on hold for 6 months, and again the same with the taxi fare increase, is to again put that on hold for 6 months and review.
Thank you very much for that update. That is as is in the papers. I did circulate to members of the committee that an email I had from Mr. Chowdhury speaking on behalf of some of the drivers that they didn't want to increase their fares and would we not give it an increase. So that would appear to have the support at least of some drivers, but the members, if anybody wishes to speak on this item, please indicate. Nobody wishing to speak, Kimberly? Nobody put their electronic hand up now?
No hands, Chair.
Thank you. Well, the proposals are as set out in the agenda.
Chairman, Councillor Darcy's put his hand up.
Please go ahead, Martin.
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question, because it says 6 months. And obviously there are some things on that which are quite significant. For example, one is to do with our climate change action plan, which is reducing the cost of licenses for people with ultra low emission vehicles. And obviously it'd be nice to try and get something like that, which is, I don't think, going to negatively impact anybody through, but I'm assuming the whole thing has to go as a package. So I just wondered how far the actual consultation had got before it came to a halt.
The consultation had been completed, and it was coming back to committee with comments from drivers regarding all the issues that we were raising. So that's what was coming back to the committee on the 23rd of March for you to consider the responses to the public consultation.
Thank you, Paul. But it is very much a package. I don't think we can cherry pick, particularly as you know there was going to be a rise otherwise to level off the loss of income. So of course the taxis aren't hardly being used at the moment, so the climate is that's why the ultraviolet's so bad for you at the moment, but apparently. So there we are. So that if there's nobody else, there are three proposals, and the recommendation was to consider, do we agree the three proposals set out in the agenda at item 7, that is Hackney Carriage private hire policy review to pause for 6 months, the fare review to pause, the review remain as they currently are and look again in a further 6 months, and the fees to cancel the proposed Hackney Carriage and private hire increase in licence fees. Are those agreed?
Chair, Councillor Reid has put her hand up.
She's put her hand up. Okay. Councillor Reid.
I'm sorry, Chair, I hadn't got the screen completely ready. It's my fault. So apologies for that. I just wanted to say that because of COVID, we all know that taxi drivers have had a very rough deal. They've been the most affected group to contract the disease, the virus. And so, you know, I think this is a very good policy they're using now.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Anybody else, Kimberly?
Councillor Goodridge has put his hand up.
Michael.
Chairman, should there be any temporary regulations for taxi drivers during this time? I mean, procedures that they should be adopting when taking passengers and so on, and should we be involved in that at all? Or is it all government regulated and it applies to everybody regardless of which borough they're in?
It is all government regulated, and we did discuss this at a pre-meet a couple of weeks ago, but it is government regulated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No more hands up there.
Thank you. So members, the three items that are proposed, are they agreed?
Agreed.
Good. Good. Everybody agreed? Anybody against? No. Good. We should now go on to the next item, which is street trading review. Now, Richard Homewood hopefully is in the room. I don't know whether he's got in or not. Yes, he has.
Yes.
So I will ask Richard Homewood to introduce this item, the street trading review.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, councillors. The licensing of street trading is regulated by the Local Government Loans Provisions Act. and under that Act, we can designate streets as consent streets or prohibited streets to control and manage the impact of street trading on the community, and also to manage the business and economic viability of businesses. We have in the past historically designated some streets consent streets, but not all streets in the borough. And there are a few prohibited streets, mainly A roads, where we wouldn't want street trading going on for safety reasons. More recently, we've had increasing numbers of complaints regarding the impact of street trading on communities. And I'm sure some of the members present will be aware of some of those issues with street trading. Naturally, the impact of COVID has led to more people trying and experimenting with street trading. And because the bulk of the roads in the borough aren't regulated by this legislation and are not designated as consent streets, there is no street trading control in place to prevent those activities going on or direct those people to more appropriate locations for street trading. We were due this year to review the policy on street trading, and it's an opportune time now to do that because of the increasing popularity of street trading at the moment and the increasing impact that's having on the community. So the report sets out in the appendices a timeline for that review. It is quite a lengthy process, and the report to you today is effectively seeking your authority to begin the consultation process to review the designation of streets and review the other matters within the policy. I think I'll leave it there and happily take any questions from members, Chair.
Thank you very much, Richard. Members, anybody wish to?
Councillor James first.
Who was first, Kimberly?
Councillor James, Councillor Darcy, Councillor Keane, and then Councillor Gale.
Councillor James, then.
Yes.
First, please.
Okay. Could the officer explain the difference financially between a licensed street where you grant a license, presumably a fee, and a consent street where we grant a consent, but presumably they have to have a license to be consented to be able to trade in a consent street? I cannot work out the difference between the licensed street with a license or a consent with a consent financially. Thank you.
Richard.
If I can, Chair, in financial terms, it will depend on what we set the fees at for the different license, for a license or a consent. Historically, most local authorities use the consent street approach, not the license street approach. And certainly our preference would be to continue using the consent street approach, because that does give you slightly more control over the activities of the street trader. So we're not proposing to designate any streets as licensed streets. We're proposing to review our consent street designations and our prohibited street designations. And like with many other authorities now, as it says in the report, we're probably minded to recommend that all streets in the borough are designated consent streets, apart from those that we've already designated prohibited streets. And that will give us the ability and the flexibility to allow street trading where we think it's appropriate, where it won't have a significant impact on the community or the environment. And that's our preferred route, if you like, now.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Darcy.
Yeah, I had actually a very similar question, but I had a secondary question, which was what process is involved in giving a consent?
When we receive an application for a consent street, that application is notified to all the councillors, it's notified to the town and parish councils, and it is advertised in the local community. So we'll publish it on our website so that people are made aware that an application has been received. and then we'll take feedback before we decide whether to issue the license or not.
So you mean that when an individual comes to you and says, I want to open a street trading operation on this street, that's the process that you go through?
Yes, so somebody will apply for a street trading consent. They will indicate on that where they would like to trade. We will then share that information with the range of people I've described and get feedback from them on whether they would support it, object to it, or have issues with it. And then we consider that, and if it's something we felt we could deal with, we would. If it's something that was particularly controversial, we bring it to members of the committee to make a decision on. But normally the decisions are delegated to officers in these cases.
Thank you.
Does that answer your? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. That's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think this is a far more sensible way to go on, because it gives the public and local councils much more of an understanding of what can be done and what they can say about somebody who wishes to come onto a street, you know, local to them. And I think it's something that we should have done a long time ago. So I'm all in favour of this. I think it's a very good idea.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Chairman. Some of you are aware that in Milford we've had some very big issues with problems in Cherry Tree Road, to name the area that's having a problem at the moment. The residents there have had to endure a pizza van twice a week since the 1st of August last year. So they will be very pleased that this is being reviewed, and I'm very grateful that you've brought this forward. Can I just ask, is the consent issued, and is there a time limit on the consent that's given?
Richard, please.
We can impose a range of conditions on the consent. So if we can impose conditions about location, we can impose conditions about environmental impact and community impact in terms of hours of trading, and all things like emissions from, in this case, the pizza van with the wood burner. So we bear all that in mind, and we could impose conditions on the consent to try to control all those things. And if the operator fails to comply with those conditions, then we could take action to either remove the consent or make them move the vehicle and apply the conditions strictly. In terms of time limit, you've caught me on the hop, and I'd have to defer to Gillian.
Well, they are, because I've got consent streets in my ward, and it comes up every so often for renewal, and it has a time limit on it, so it doesn't just roll on forever.
Thank you, Chairman.
Is that okay, Maxine?
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I just wondered if somebody was allowed to, if a street became a consent street and people were allowed there, whether that was just ad infinitum and
Councillor Martin.
I think local retailers will also be happier if there's more effective control of street trading. So I'm very much for it.
Thank you. Kimberly, anybody else got their electronic hand up?
Councillor James.
Sorry?
Councillor James.
Councillor
and Councillor
James.
Goodwin.
Right, Councillor James, you can go again.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to come back. On the very beginning, at 2.1 recommendations, it says streets, all streets and public open spaces. Now, presumably, some public open spaces are not owned by Waverley or the County Council, because they can be National Trust or something like that, but they're still public open spaces or parish councils. So would that be an automatic right for a consent for a public open space, even if it's not within Waverley's authority to actually grant the consent on it? Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
If I can, Chair, and I'll defer to Gillian if I get anything wrong, but the definition of street for these purposes includes any land to which the public has free access. So it could include land owned by other people, but obviously if we were going to include land designated by, include land for designation, owned by other people, we would have to consult the owners of that land first to get their agreement to include it in the consent. So the consent would generally apply to streets, which is the highway and the footways. But if we want to include other land in it, we would need to seek the permission of the owner of that land before we included it. Designated an area or a street a consent street doesn't automatically give people the right to trade. Individuals then have to apply to us for a consent to trade on that land, on that designated land.
Thank you,
Chair.
So yeah, it's very much as in highways law by the look of it, Councillor James. Anywhere where the public have access is covered. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very much in favour of all this and starting the ball rolling on the review. I was just wondering whether, again, because of the current situation we're in, whether there are any prohibited streets or anything arising where we should be raising matters as a temporary solution that's urgent, to allow people to trade which currently they couldn't apply to. I mean, I'm not keen in having too much extra, but I suspect most of the important streets where people want to trade due to, they can't trade inside their shop and want to trade outside it for various reasons, we can give consent anyway on that. So are there any, the simple question is, are there any emergency temporary arrangements that are being asked for that we have power to grant if necessary due to the current problem?
Thank you very much. Well, I understand there's a bill today going to be pushed through very quickly through Parliament about pavement licensing. But what that will effect that will have. But otherwise, Richard, is there anything that we need to do as an emergency?
If I can, Chair, street trading consents and street trading under this legislation doesn't apply to people trading outside of their business premises. So if somebody has a business, a shop or a cafe, and they want to trade on the pavement outside of that, that isn't covered by this street trading legislation. That's covered by different legislation around tables and chairs on the highway. And the legislation that Councillor Knowles is referring to that's being pushed through today is about tables and chairs licensing outside of business premises. The idea of that change in legislation that they're proposing today is only going to run until March 2021, and it's to help businesses by allowing them to trade outside of cafes and bars and restaurants on the pavement areas, so they don't have to have people inside the premises. So that's a different set of legislation around tables and chairs licensing, and we're currently talking to the County Council and other colleagues in other boroughs and districts about how that will work, because tables and chairs licensing outside of premises on the pavements is managed by the County Council under normal circumstances, and it's not entirely clear at the moment whether this would be a County Council function still, or whether they want to relax it and give it to the boroughs and districts. But there will be issues about liability that will have to be agreed with the County Council. And the idea of that is to help businesses, in the sort of recovery from COVID and the lockdown, by allowing some flexibility around tables and chairs outside their premises. So that's totally separate from street trading in terms of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act. And that is about supporting businesses. There's also been a circular letter from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government last week, urging us to go easy effectively on street traders, again, to support their recovery from the lockdown and COVID-19. Obviously, local authorities like us will be feeding back to the MHCLG about the impact of relaxation of street trading laws on the community. And the pizza van in Cherry Tree Road is a classic example of that, where both ourselves and the parish council have tried to mediate with the the operator of that vehicle and suggest an alternative location, and they've declined to move. So the MHCLG needs to understand the implications of being relaxing the rules and being supportive of businesses, and it has to be a balance between the rights of businesses and the rights of the community, and that's the challenge we face at the moment. But the government is doing what it can to support businesses, and we have to mitigate the impact of that at the same time on the community. So it's a difficult juggling act at the moment. So there is some there are some messages about temporary relaxation and easing of regulation, but that doesn't always sit well with the community, and we're in the middle of it as the arbiter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and that is very true. These vans are appearing very close to houses, but I think probably the Pavement Licensing Act, or whatever they're going to call it, Michael, will deal with what you're thinking about. So we'll wait to see what the gems of wisdom appear today. Anybody else got their hand up, please, Kimberly?
I have Councillor James, but I think maybe that one's been left up from last time.
I've seen Councillor Gale put her hand up.
Yes, I've got Councillor Gale, and I've also got Gillian Carson-Jones with her hand up.
Councillor Gale, you go first, please.
Yeah, as being very new, Chairman, I don't understand some of the things that happen, and we do have a procedure for the review, which it looks like it's going to take around 33 weeks before the policy actually comes into force, if it goes through. Do these things always take exactly this long, or do they sometimes come in a little bit quicker? It's just, I know I'm going to be asked the question by the residents in Milford.
If I can share, one of the things I am committed to do is to sit down with officers and go through that timetable and firm it up with some data, because it is indicative at the moment. It just talks about X number of weeks for each stage. Following today, we will need to put some dates to that, and I will happily come back to members by email setting out a more detailed action plan for the review, setting out some key dates going forward to give you a bit more certainty about how long it's going to take. And if we can trim any of that, we certainly will, because we certainly don't want it to take that long if we can avoid it. But there are periods where if you're going to consult town and parish councils, you need to give them enough time for their own committees to consider it and come back to us. So it will be a period of about 6 weeks or 6 to 8 weeks to allow all the parish and town councils to have met and considered it and come back with their comments. But we'll cut it down as much as we can.
Much appreciated, thank you.
Thank you. Gillian.
Thank you. Just to come back on the point you mentioned earlier about the consents, and those are normally annual matters that are subject to renewal, and we can also revoke those. The appeal process for those types of matters is less clear. In relation to the bill, as you've heard, that's a matter that's going through the Commons today and deals with specific matters where the government has made a decision to temporarily and formally change the legislation, and that relates to planning permissions, as you've heard from Richard Homewood, and also some other matters relating to planning, which aren't matters for this committee, but construction site, working hours, etc. But in terms of the point that was mentioned, that Local Government Association has some helpful guidance about street trading that obviously is adapting to change and to deal with the situation with the pandemic as it moves. So originally they were to allow, when the shops and various businesses were closed, to allow temporary pop-up shops, if you like, to assist and support some establishments such as hospitals, etc. But again, the messaging from the Local Government Association is again a pragmatic view and encouraging councils to take that sort of approach to temporarily switch locations. And as you've heard in terms of the pizza van that's raised issues, that has been explored and wasn't taken up. But I think it's generally because of the fast moving situation, reluctance to make changes to legislation formally, but guidance which is able to change at short notice often, if that assists.
Thank you. Kimberly, anybody else with a hand up?
Oh, no, we did have Councillor Ellis, but she's put it back down.
Thank you.
Did you want to speak, Councillor Ellis? Yes, yes, Councillor Ellis would like to speak, please.
Councillor Ellis.
You need to unmute yourself, Councillor Ellis.
Okay. Sorry about that. I'm sorry, Chairman. I heard you say welcome, then I lost internet connection. So I lost it for over 20 minutes. I've just come back. I haven't been part of the debate. However, from experience, I do understand the difficulties with this particular problem for Waverley. And although I haven't listened to the debate, and I'm sorry for that, I would agree if I'm still able to vote with the recommendations.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Anybody else, Kimberly?
No more hands up, Chairman.
Okay, well then item number 8, we've had the report and discussed this and had updates from officers. So we're asking to authorise the consultation and going ahead with the review. Is that agreed? Everybody can't put their thumb up or something if you agree. Thank you. Thank you. That seems that everybody is. Is there anybody that isn't in favour? Then no, good. Martin, you can put your hand down now. Your electric hand's still up. They stay up once you've put them on. I don't know why. Okay, thank you. That's good. The only thing that Kimberly, can I just bring to your attention that the regulatory committee, the general purposes subcommittee, needs a fifth member. Now, last time we were asked to appoint one, and we haven't been this time.
Yeah, so, no. I was just this minute sending an email to Councillor Gale to ask if she would like to join us.
Right. Okay. So we're appointing Councillor Gale. If she says yes, of course.
If she's happy to do so.
She put her thumb up. Okay. Thank you very much. In that case, colleagues, thank you very much. And that brings this meeting to a close. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, officer.
Thank you.
Bye.